Hello and welcome to the first Beginner Plus challenge. This challenge is all based upon the knowledge that's been taught in the two series here, or the two courses, Python Beginner and Python Beginner Plus. So if you do get stuck here, or if you would like to have a look at these series before you start, please do. There's some general information in both. Some you might already be familiar with, but it's all broken down into small tutorials so you can take a look at individual topics. So this challenge has three stages. First of all, we're going to build functions using static inputs. We move ahead to utilizing functions with user inputs, and then we'll go ahead and use Tkinter to build an interface so that we can allow users to enter numbers, and then we'll deal with the numbers using a function behind the scenes, and then output a new window showing the outcome of the result of the input. Okay, so first stage then, let's have a look at the first challenge, the function with static inputs. So what we need to do first here is create a function that takes two numbers, so for example 0 and 10, and then returns the range of numbers that between the two numbers that you enter that can be divided by 2 but are not multiples of 5. So the example here is two numbers that can be entered into the function, 0 and 10. It would then return the numbers 2, 4, 6, 8. Obviously, between the numbers 0 and 2, 2, 4, 6, and 8 can be divided by 2, but should not include multiples of 5. So you can see here 10 hasn't been included here. So if it was just divided by 2, then 10 would appear here in the list. Obviously, that's a multiple of 5, so therefore it isn't outputted. All right, so let's just break this down a bit. So I'm going to need to build a function. Okay, that's clear. It's going to take in, or that's going to include two parameters, so maybe x and y. And then it should return a range of numbers. So between the two numbers that we enter, that can be divided by 2 and multiples of 5. So I'm going to need to probably here create a loop over a set of, or a range of numbers. So these two numbers that I enter, say 1 and 10, if I put that in a range, for example, I can then loop over those numbers. And then for each of those numbers in that range, I'm going to need to check to make sure if it can be divided by 2 and also if it can be divided by 5. And then what I'll do is I'll create a list, and for all the numbers that can be divided by 2 but not 5, I'll put that into a list, and then I'll go ahead and just kind of print that out at the end. So that's the plan in my head. So let's go over to the code. So let's start by creating a new function. I'm just going to call this divisible. There we go. So it's going to take in, or it's going to include two parameters. So x and y, for example, in this case, that could be number 1, number 2, whatever you like. And then, so I'm going to then find the numbers that have been entered between x and y. And like I said, I'm going to try and divide them by 2 and 5. If they can divide by 2 and not 5, then I'm going to add them to a new list. So let's just call this list D. So D equals, and then a new list here. Okay. So let's create a for loop. So for I in range, or shall we say, yeah, for I, for x, or whatever, for I in range, let's say, let's pass in x and y. Okay, so let's just go ahead and now just print I. Let's just see what happens. So we'll just go ahead and run this. So you can see there's an error here for I, sorry, for I in range, apologies. Okay, so let's go ahead and print. Now, we're going to need to obviously pass in some numbers here, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So say 1 and 10. So we're going to pass in some numbers. Going to call the function here, pass in the numbers. Let's give that a go. And there we go. So you can see what's happening here. In actual fact, that this range here then is passing in the numbers 1 to 9. So between the numbers 1 and 10, that doesn't include 10. So if you did want to include 10, you would need to obviously type in 1 to 11. So that's important to understand and remember with range. Okay, so it's between these numbers. So between 1 and up to 10, not including 10. So now we know the behavior of using a range here in a for loop. We can now press forward and think about how we're going to check whether each of these numbers that get passed into I, if they can be divided by 2 and not divided by 5. Because obviously if they are divided by 2 and not 5, we want to output them. So here then we're going to have an if statement. So let's go for if I, which is a number, and then we use the modulo 2. So what we're saying here then is if I, the number that gets passed into I, that's the first number, say, in the range of the two numbers that we've entered, say number 1. So if 1 can be divided by 2, if that returns 0, then it means it can be divided by 2. So obviously 1 can't be divided by 2, or it won't return 0. So therefore this will be false. So that's going to obviously break this if statement and continue, or it's going to go on to the false component of the if statement if we program that. So let's move on to the next part. So we can say the number must be able to be divided by 2 and the number modulo 5. So if we take the number and divide it by 5, then it must not equal 0 this time. So this is why we use the exclamation mark equals, so not equal to 0. So in short then, what we have now is an if statement which checks the number of each of these numbers in this for loop to make sure, first of all, it needs to be divided by 2. If it is, this will be true. And we're using AND, so this must be true as well. So is the number that we're currently working with also divisible by 0? So if it is, then this is going to return false. If it isn't divisible by 5, then this is going to return true. And what we're trying to do here in this if statement is return true here and return true here as well. If we do that, what we want to do is we want to grab our new list here. We want to update it. So we can use append, and then we want to update that. We're going to input this as a string, and then we're going to put in the number I. So that's the current number that we're working with. So we update our new list with the number that is divisible by 5 and not divisible by, is divisible by 2 and it's not divisible by 5. So let's just go ahead and print out the result here. So we're going to say print, and we're going to use join. So let's just join. So that's basically going to take out all the, it tells you here if we float over it, it's going to take out all the numbers here from this list and just output them. Okay, so let's just give that a go, and there we go. So if we move this to 11, we can see that we don't output 10. We can move that to 20. So, and there we go. So that's the basic function completed. So let's take a look at the specifications for stage 2 here. So now we have created a function. We now need to ensure that the user can actually type something in. So we're going to try and set this up now to have 2 inputs. So we're going to allow the user to input from the terminal 2 numbers. That's going to be passed into the function that we previously created, and it's going to perform the same process and return the numbers. Yep, so this time, not only is it going to return the numbers, but we, in addition, need to create a new function maybe that will now check for the data types that have been entered. Because, of course, the user could type in the letter D or the letter A, and obviously we can't calculate that. So we need some way of capturing that, and then we're going to output that to the user and tell them that's the incorrect data type. Now, what we want to do here is we don't want to take the user out of the program. We want to keep the user in the program, so we need to create a loop so that the user can keep typing in an input should they input an incorrect data type. So I should have created a flow chart here, but essentially what's going to happen in this application then is the user is going to be asked to enter two numbers. That gets passed to the function that we created. It then gets checked to see if it's divided by 2 and not divided by 5. Now before that, we need to check to make sure that the data types are the correct data types. They should be integers. So we're going to need to create some error checking or validation method of some sort before it gets passed to that function that checks whether the numbers are correct, or whether they can, be divided by 2 and not 5. So what we want to try and do is we want to allow the user in the terminal to be able to keep typing in something until they actually type in a number. So for example, the output should say, to begin with, type in the first number. The user types in 1, and then the user is asked to type in a second number. They type in the letter A. Now the program should capture that as an issue, tell the user that they've typed in the wrong wrong data type. So in this case, they've typed in a string and it's expecting an integer, and then it asks them again to type in the number again, and it will keep looping around that until the user has actually typed in the correct data type, a number. Okay, so hopefully that is clear. So have a go, and then let's have a look at the solution. So what I'm going to do here is create a new function, and I'm going to call this, for example, user input. Okay, so I'll just pass that for now. Just zoom in a little bit, or zoom out. Okay, so what's going to happen then in this program? First of all, we're going to start this program by just calling the user input. Okay, so here then, what's going to happen now is that the user is going to be asked to input two numbers. So let's call these numbers x and y. So x, we're going to store it, in the x variable here. So this is going to be an input. So we're going to say input, and then please enter the first number. Okay, so let's give that a go. First number, and there we go. So you notice that if I do type in a letter at the moment, it still accepts that. It's still going to save that letter into x. So we want to cast that into an integer because we definitely want to work with integers here. So we put that there. So now, for example, if I run this, if I type in a number, we're okay. If I would type in a letter, then we cause an error. And of course, this is a value error. So this is a value error. This is an error that we can capture. And we can capture this by utilizing a try except. So let's say try. So we're going to try this. And then if there is an exception of any sorts, we're going to capture that. So accept a value error. So we're going to capture any value errors if we try to enter the wrong data type here. And then we can then just define what it is we want to do. So let's just say print, please enter a whole number. How about that? Okay, so now we're going to capture this value error, and we're just going to print out our own output, which is now going to say print, please enter a whole number. So let's just give this a go again. So this time we're going to type in something incorrect, and you can now see this time it outputs please enter a whole number. So with that in mind, what we want to try and do is to make sure that if the user does enter an incorrect data type, then we want to send them back. We want to get them to loop again over this and show them the input and allow them to try it again. So what we can do here is we can have a while loop. So while true, which is going to be all the time, it's going to keep looping over this here. So we need to be careful with our indentation here. So while true, which is always going to be the case, this is just going to keep looping. So let's just give that a go and see what's going to happen here. So if I type in, you can just about see that, apologies, D, then it's just going to ask me again to type in something else. So let me just stop that, close that. I'll show you that again. Bring the terminal up. So if I type in something incorrect, then the error appears, and now I'm being asked to type in something else again, and I'm going to be kept being told it's the wrong number until I type in an integer. And you can see that because at the moment while is always going to be true, you can see in actual fact we're just going to keep looping forever regardless what we enter. So that we need some way of closing this loop. So if I press Control C here to close that. So what we're going to need to do here is that if, for example, the user does type in something, then we want to run an else here. And what that else is going to be is break. So we're going to tell the Python to stop the while loop and continue with the application. So let's just give this a go. So if I type in, for example, the correct number, this time you can see the program ends because there's nothing else is required here, and we're good to go. Else, if I type in a wrong data type, for example D, or you can see that I'm continually asked to type in the whole number. Okay, so that deals with that first loop. Now we want to do this with both of the inputs here, remember. So we're going to need a way of capturing the value error for both of the inputs. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and potentially we can just kind of embed a try except inside of a try except. So let's just down here, but let's just copy this first. So I'm just going to copy this component here. So I'm just going to create a copy of the try except, and I'm just going to indent that inside. Oh, I'm just going to indent that inside of his try except. Just bring that up. So this time we're going to say y equals. So we're going to store two inputs here, the first and the second input. We're going to ask the user to enter something else. So this is going to be the second number. Okay, so what should happen now then is that you can see here, if this fails, we're going to use the except here. Now, if this is okay, if the user types in the correct number, then we're going to run the second try except for the second number. But what we want to do here is we want to loop this as well. So what we want to do here is say while true again. So we just need to indent this. Now we need the else again. So let's use the else here. And then what we're going to do here is just break here. And that seems like a logical way of doing this. So to read the code then, we've got an inner while here. So we just give you a bit of space so you can see this. So what's going to happen here then? While is true, so this is just going to loop forever unless it's told not to. Now what's happening here then? The user types in something. If they type in something correctly, then that means the code falls down to the next line here. So if they type in the number 1 here, then it will fall down to this piece of code. And we have another loop here, an inner loop here. So we're going to perform the same sort of operation. So let's imagine that the user types in a second number, and in actual fact, everything is okay. Well, they've typed in the number 2, for example. That means the else statement here is going to run. So it's going to break. It's going to break this while loop, and it's going to come out of this while loop. And now we're inside of this outer while loop. Now this was true. This was absolutely fine. So we didn't run the except. So we're now going to run the else, which is break. So we're now going to break out of this while loop here. So therefore, there is nothing else to run in this program. So the program will close. Now, if, for example, the user types in A here, then we're going to capture the exception here and ask them to print out. And we're going to keep looping around that until the user does type in the correct number, the first number. Now, remember, we do the same thing here. So if they do type in the first number correctly, and then they type in the wrong number incorrectly, the except here is going to run, and it's just going to loop around here until they type in the right number. When they do type in the right number, we'll break. We'll break this loop and then go to this loop. This is actually going to be okay, so we're going to break that loop, and then the program continues. So let's see this in action here. So we're going to type in the first number and the second number. Everything is okay. First number is okay. Second number is not okay. And you can see here I'm asked to type in the second number again. And that's going to happen until I type in a second number. And this time you can see that the program exits there. If I type in the incorrect number to begin with, you can see that I'm asked to keep entering the first number until it's correct. And then I can enter the second number. So I think that is the stage 2 challenge completed. We created a function that takes in two numbers from the terminal. We've checked for the data type, we validated the data, and then we created a loop so that users can keep typing in an input should they input an incorrect data type. So now let's take a look at the final stage. Stage 3. So now we need to create an interface with Tkinter. So instead of allowing the user to type into the terminal, we're now going to create a graphical user interface, a window, which is going to allow the user to type in some numbers. They should be able to press a button, and those two numbers would then go through the similar function that we created previously. We'll check the numbers can be divided by 2 and not 5. And then we will return those numbers that can be divided by 2, but not 5, in a new window, which will be a scrollable list so that the user can see all the numbers that can be divided by 2 and not 5. So for this one, I will just start again. It's probably just easier to do it that way. So let's go with, let's import Tkinter as TK. Right, so that's Tkinter package. So this is a built-in Python library, so we can utilize it. As long as you've got Python installed, we should be able to utilize this. So that imports Tkinter in. So we now need to just create a new window. So let's do that. So window equals tk.tk. So that just basically starts up TK. We created a new window, and then we can just define, for example, the window geometry, so the size and shape of this window that we want to develop, so 400 by 210, for example, and then we'll give it a nice little title. So that can be, we call this divisible numbers. Okay, right, so I spelled that right. Divisible, sorry. Numbers. Okay, so now we got that in place. Let's take a look, see what that looks like. So we'll just run this as per normal, and you should see that nothing appears, nothing happens. So the reason why that is because we need to make sure that we run the window main loop to get things all started. So without this, it isn't going to start. So all we've done here is we've just defined some. All we've done here in actual fact is just defined a variable, right? So, and we've just added some parameters to those variables. So we need to actually start this. So we use the main loop to actually start the application. So run that again, and with a nice little title. Okay, so now we have our interface. We now need to think about adding some inputs to allow the user to enter two inputs. And then we're going to need a button at the bottom here, say, so they can submit their inputs. So we're going to keep window main loop at the bottom because that's going to trigger off everything and run the application. So let's go ahead now and build everything that we're going to need. So we're going to need a label to begin with. So label, of course, label 1 equals TK. So we're going to grab something from the TK library here, which is the label. And this is just one of the tools that are available. So we're going to say that the text equals enter first number. There we go. Right, so that's my label in place. So now what I need to do is I need to actually define where that label is going to appear. So I need to place it here, and I can do that using the X and Y. So X equals 10, and let's say Y axis equals 20. So that's going to be 10 down, so 10 across, X, so 10 from the left, and then 20 from the top. So that's where this is going to appear, this label. I can also define the height, and that just makes things nice and consistent. Height equals 25. Yeah, give that a go. Right, so that's that in place. So let's take a look at that. Just run this again. You can now see I've got a nice little label here. So now I need some sort of entry box. So let's call this entry underscore box 1. Oh, just entry box 1. Go for underscore box 1 equals, and then tk dot, and then we're going to need to grab the entry tool, and then we're going to say text equals nothing at all. So you can add some text in there to begin with. So we're just going to keep that blank. So that's my entry box. And of course, I'm going to need to place this. So let's go ahead and place this. So this is the entry box dot place. So this time I want to place this slightly differently because it needs to be under the previous label here. So we're going to give this 40. We know it's 25 in height and it's at 20. So 20, 25, 40 seems like a good place to go. So let's give that a go. Run that application. You can now see we have an input field here. Okay. So now we just need to do the same thing again for the second label. So I'm just going to copy all this, paste it in here, call this label 2, box 2, and then I just need to change some of these parameters. So these set of boxes are going to go underneath. So label 2 here is going to be at Y80, and then the box will be at 100. So now then when I run this, I should now have 2 boxes. Obviously this is the second number. I just need to quickly change that. So I'm closing the application by pressing Control-C on Mac here. So you just need to close that down. And then you can run it again. There we go. Okay, so now we've got 2 boxes. Now we need a submission box of some sort, or a button even. So let's go ahead and create a button. So I'm going to just call this button equals TK dot. And then we're going to need to bring in a button from the TK tools. We're going to need some text. So let's just say text equals detect divisibles. Divisible. Okay, so that's the text. Let's go for button dot config, and then we're going to say font equals 16. So we'll give it a slightly larger font, maybe this, and then we need to go ahead and just place this. So button dot place x equals 10, y equals 170, and then we go for the width equals 380, and then height equals 35. Right, so there's some different parameters there. So let's go ahead and just try that out. And you can now see we've got a nice little box here. So now we just need to think about this workflow. We now have this. We now have some way of typing in some numbers, and we press this button. So we want to perform an action when we press this button here. So what we need to do with this button, if we add the command here, equals, we can then connect this to a function so it then performs that action. So before we do that, because we don't actually have a function yet, let's go ahead now and build that functionality. And that's pretty much what we did previously. So I'm just going to break that down into 2 steps. I'm going to create a function here called check user input, or validate user input, if you like. So here I'm going to just add 2 variables here. So there's going to be ebox1, entry box 1. So I'm just going to grab all the data from entry box 1. So that's how you do that. And then I'm going to create ebox 2, entry box 2, and that's going to equal the entry box 2 dot get. So that's going to get the data from the user's data. So the user types into the 2 different entry box. We just grab that data. So now we've got that data, we can now use our try except again. So let's try x equals integer ebox 1. So here we can simply just check to make sure that the number is an integer again. So we're using this try except pattern again. If it is, we're going to store the number in the x variable here. So that does that, and then we want the nested try. So this is going to be the y equals, and then this is going to be integer again. So we're going to check or cast or make sure that the second number that the user's entered is a integer. And then we're going to need the except here. So this time we don't have a loop because we don't need it, because the user's typing in something into the interface here. So except, sorry. So that's not going to be needed, the loop here. So all we need to do now is say error box, which we haven't created yet. We need to change the text of that error box. And then we just need to make that return something different. So please enter a whole number. Okay, so we haven't built this error box yet. We will do shortly. So that's the error box, and then we can continue with the except here. Value error again. And exactly the same here, so we can just copy and paste this. So we want to change the error box again should the first entry have a problem. Okay, so if, for example, all the numbers are fine, if the data types are correct, then we're going to run our divisible function again. So we're going to take in two parameters again, x and y. Okay, so we just need that divisible function again. We just need to kind of build that back up. So hopefully you can see the workflow here. So what's going to happen is the user is going to type in two numbers. Now the button here is going to call. So let's say command equals, and then that's the check. It's called check user input. So it's going to run this function here. So command check user input, we're going to need a comma there. Okay, so that's going to run the function. Great. So we're going to grab the data from the input fields, and then we're going to validate the data. And then if the data has been validated, then we're going to pass that data x and y over to our divisible function again. So let's go ahead and create that function up. So divisible takes in x and y. And then it's basically just what we did previously. We just need to d equals, obviously there's many ways of doing this. I'm just following what we did previously, I in range, and then x and y. And then what we did there, we created an if statement, if you remember. So we said I modulo 2 is equal to 0, and I modulo 5 is not equal to 0. Okay, so this time we're just going to d.append, make sure we cast what is a string I. So we're going to add the numbers back into this d list here. We need a colon there, and that should be it for now. Let's just go ahead and just print D for now, just to see if this works. So what we should have now then is the window appears. We're allowed to enter some numbers. Once we press the button, that's going to send a signal to this function here to start. This function here is going to start. It's going to grab the data that the user's entered. If it's validated, then we're going to send that data across to this function here. So the data comes into this, and we run our function again to validate or to check the data that can be divided by 2 and not 5. And then we're going to add that data to this list, and we're going to print it out. Whew. Okay, let's give this a go. 1 and 10. Detect, and you can see here that we are now printing out those numbers. Okay, so what we want to do now then is obviously not print them here, but like the challenge suggested, we now need to make a new window and then list all of these numbers in that window. Right, so here then in actual fact is where we can start a new window. So let's just grab a new window equals tk dot tk. So we're just going to create a new window, and same kind of parameters as before. So we just copy this, and we call this something slightly different. Let's just call this the output. Okay, so same window size. We need to call it n window. Let's not forget that. Okay, so that's the new window that's going to appear. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a scroll bar. So let's say scroll bar.pack side. So we're going to create a scroll bar equals right, and then fill equals y. Okay, so essentially what we're doing here is we're going to be creating a scroll bar. We've defined the parameters there of our scroll bar. So let's just actually build a scroll bar first. So scroll bar equals scroll bar. And then we need to define where the scroll bit should be. So that's on the window. Now scroll bar is a tool that we're going to need to bring into this project. So we're going to say from Tkinter import scroll bar. So that's the tool that we need to bring in. So that's going to build a nice little scroll bar. So we defined that we want a scroll bar and where it's going to be on the right hand side and the orientation of the scroll bar. So Y means it's going to be an up and down scroll bar. If it was X, we could scroll across. So that just defines the type of scroll bar. So we can probably give this a go now and have a look at this. So run the application again. Let's type in 2 valid numbers. And you can now see we have a new window, which at the moment isn't scrollable. However, yeah, it's not scrollable. There's no data in there at the moment, so there's nothing to scroll. But you can see the dynamics here of this window. It's starting to form. Okay, so next up then, we now need to kind of display our list on this new window. So let's go ahead and do that. So here then, I'm going to create a list. So new list equals, we're going to use a list box this time. So another tool that we're going to need to bring in. So up here, let's just bring in the list box. So these are all tools that you can have a look at the Tkinter documentation for. There's loads of different tools that you can bring in. So end window, we're going to define end window, and then we're going to define the scrollable. So we need to connect this to the scroll bar.set. Okay, so essentially what we're doing here is we're just attaching everything here. So end list. So this list box is going to have a scroll. So you're going to be able to list. So you're going to be able to scroll the list. So there's a few options here. I've just put this in place because there's a few options here. So this can be a list that can be scrollable. So you can scroll the actual window of the interface, or you can potentially create a list and make that scrollable. So I'm just really kind of highlighting that point. So then I can just set some parameters so that I can define where the list is going to be. So endList dot pack. So pack here is going to, there's a few options here. This is going to organize the widget in the list box widget, if you like. So for example, let's go for side. So here is going to essentially just determine which side this is going to be on. So side, let's go for equals left, and then we've got this option for pack. Fill equals, and then we go for both. So again, fill here just determines whether the widget kind of fills any extra space in the window. So we've got that in place. So that's just some kind of dynamics of where it's going to be placed. And now we can just configure the scroll bar. So scroll bar dot config, and then command equals, and that's going to be endList dot yView. Okay, right. So with that configured, with all the scrolling, etc., let's go for a for loop. So for, let's say for number in D. So what we're going to do here then is just kind of unpack this, if you like, or iterate, over this list that should be filled up with all the numbers that are divisible by 2 and not 5. So we'll then loop through those numbers, and then we'll basically get our list. So get our list, and then we're going to insert that data into it. Okay, and then number. Okay, so now we've kind of put everything into this list. I think we're done. So let's give this a go. So we need a code on there. So fire this up. Let's go for numbers between 1 and 10. I press detect, and you can now see I've got a scrollable list. Now, obviously you can't see that scrollable list. What's handy here though is that because you've made a new window, I can now just go back to this window and just change. And you can now see I've got a nice scrollable list here. Notice that I can use the wheel. I should be able to use the trackpad, and I can also scroll here as well. So let's just take a look at something here with scrolling. So here we set the list to be scrollable. So let's just get rid of the scroll bar on the actual attached to the window here. And we keep the scroll bar here with, we need scroll bar window, sorry. So let's just get rid of this second option here. Let's just run this again. Say 1 and 100. So now you can see that I can actually scroll the list, but there is no scroll bar. So it depends on kind of what output you want to achieve here. There's different ways of attaching scroll bars to different elements or widgets here in Tkinter. So let's finish this off then, because we need one more thing, and that's the error box. So that's something we didn't build earlier. So at the bottom here then, let's just build an error box, and that's just going to equal a tk.label. So this is going to be a message that's going to appear to the user should they enter the wrong data type. So we just need to place that. So I'm just going to grab this piece of code here. So error box config. We can define the font, but we don't need to. Let's just place. So we're going to need to place this. So X can be 10, Y can be 130. So that should be between the button and the last input. So we'll give that a go. Let's just double check this. So error box. So currently it's stored nothing at all. Now what's going to happen here then, the error box, we're overriding the text or adding text to it. This is going to appear if the user types in the wrong value. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. So let's give this a go. So A1 and A, and you can see it says, please enter a whole number. Okay, so let's go ahead and type in VA. Same thing's going to happen until you type in a number on both. And you can now see that, well, in this case, there are no numbers there, but in this case, you can now see that we now have all the numbers. Okay, so you may have seen that we have this error here, this local variable y error. And I think what this is, if we look closely here, that we try to, first of all, validate the first input data type. And then if that's okay, we then move to the second try except. Now, if this is, if this does receive an error, we're going to print out the error here, but we're going to continue. And it looks like potentially we're still going to try and run this divisible. And it says here, unbound local error, local variable y. So let me just show you how that actually appears. So if I type in a number here and a number here, we're all good. If I type in a number here, a letter here and a number here, it seems to be okay. We get the expected result. But if I type in a number here and a letter here, we get the unbound local error. Okay, so we could just deal with that, but let's just take a look at this code here. What about if we were to take away, remove the second try except? And let's just give this a go again. So if we say 1 and 1, should be okay. A and 1 should return, please enter the whole number, and then 1 and A, and there we go. So it looks like a much better pathway at this point. Obviously, there's a few other optimizations here. This is just for demonstration, just to get the program started, and I think we're done. So I do hope that was mildly entertaining or useful. It does make things a little bit more exciting as a beginner if we start looking at utilizing user interfaces. It just makes things, like I said, a little bit more interesting than just printing out to the terminal. And I guess that's the general principle here of trying to bring in some other tools to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more useful. And it gets us understanding of the interface, how an interface might be needed to be considered, gets the computational thinking brain working. So I do hope that was useful and you enjoyed that, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.